Good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The controversial Chinese technology firm Huawei is to be allowed to play a limited role in the UK's ultra-fast 5G mobile phone network. The US had urged the government to ban Huawei, saying its use could open up the UK to surveillance or sabotage from China. Though Huawei denies any involvement in espionage, ministers announced in the last hour that it has been designated a high-risk vendor and will be excluded from safety-critical or sensitive locations such as nuclear sites and military bases. Richard Galpin has this report.
How are you going to keep our data safe?
Government ministers and other senior officials went into the meeting of the National Security Council this morning to make what is a huge decision for the country. And they've decided to allow Huawei to help build the UK's new 5G network. But in a statement, the government said due to concerns about security, Huawei would be excluded from all sensitive parts of the network. And in all other areas, they'd be limited to providing just over a third of the infrastructure. It's claimed the 5G mobile technology will change our lives, transforming how we use the internet. Downloads will be far faster. An hour-long TV programme could be downloaded in just 7 seconds, leaving 4G way behind. And our devices could not only proactively contact us, but could also be in contact with other machines. For example, a patient's medical history could be downloaded to ambulance crews on the journey to hospital, helping ensure the patient gets the right treatment.
This is a hugely important emerging technology, and it's very important that the UK leads on it. So every country will be making this difficult judgment, and it is a difficult judgment, but I think a sensible compromise whereby you use what is not just cheaper equipment from Huawei, but generally acknowledged to be good quality equipment too, is in the network, but only where it's safe to do so.
Despite all this, many are convinced that allowing Huawei to be part of the 5G development is a massive mistake, compromising security. The United States is particularly worried and now threatening the much vaunted post-Brexit trade deal with the UK.
I think it would make it very difficult, if not impossible, for us to achieve that gold standard trade agreement, which we all want. And I think Conservative MP that you have, Tom Tugendhat, said it best when he said, at a time when you've gone through this brutal effort in order to claw back some sovereignty from Brussels, why then surrender it to Beijing?
There are certainly risks involved in the decision on Huawei, but the UK's intelligence agencies seem confident they can prevent China from using its involvement in the network to collect sensitive information. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Well, we'll talk more about security in just a moment. First, though, let's go to Westminster and get the thoughts of our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Just how big a gamble do you think this decision is, Norman?
Oh, it's huge, and I've no doubt folk in Downing Street will probably be looking with trepidation at the president's Twitter feed to see if there's a sort of incoming verbal exocet from the White House, because there's no doubt Mr. Johnson risks a full-blown row with the president at precisely the moment, obviously, when we're trying to strike a post-Brexit trade deal with the US. So why has he done it? I think in part he hopes his halfway house compromise deal allowing Huawei limited access, maybe that is something the president could live with. Also, well, we're not alone. The EU have also said they'll allow Huawei limited access. But above all, if you think, what was Boris Johnson's big pitch post his election victory? It was that he was going to level up the country to boost the prospects and prosperity of so-called forgotten towns outside of London and the southeast. And rolling out super-fast broadband and boosting mobile phone coverage is regarded, frankly, as absolutely critical to that. So were he to back away from that because he risks the wrath of the president, then he would face a potentially huge backlash. And I think bluntly, Mr. Johnson has decided better to disappoint the president than to risk disappointing those voters in predominantly northern seats, Labour seats, who backed him at the election.
Interesting. Thanks very much, Norman. Let's talk to our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, as well. We've heard a lot about some people's anxieties about this. What's your take on this decision today, what it might mean?
Well, it's one of the most consequential national security decisions, one of the most long-term decisions that not just this government, any government has had to take in recent times, because this determines the security of our data, of our telecoms networks, which will become increasingly important to our lives for the decades to come. More and more data, more and more personal data will be carried around these networks. More and more of the infrastructure of our lives will depend on telecommunications. And so whether there's the potential for espionage or sabotage, as some fear, is a really significant security risk. Now, officials certainly believe they can manage that risk, not eliminate it, manage it. In other words, they can reduce the risk, they can spot if something's happening, they can deal with it if it does happen. But even if you believe that that long-term risk can be managed, there are the short-term risks, which are particularly with the relationship with the United States, a close ally which has expressed its anger. It's talked about restricting intelligence sharing. Some people in the UK thought that was a bluff. We're about to find out really how angry Washington really is. Was this posturing part of Donald Trump's trade dispute with China, or is there a deeper concern about where the UK is positioning itself with China, and what will Washington now do?
Gordon, thank you. Gordon Carrera.